The number of teenagers being killed in London has risen to its highest levels since 2008. This has led to demands for new ways to combat an old problem, violent crime. It's a danger which seems to particularly affect the younger generation. Hardly a week goes by without another report of a murder in Britain, and the crisis is at its worst here in the capital of the United Kingdom.
13 years ago, Scotland had one of the worst murder rates in Western Europe. But a new approach has seen these deadly statistics almost halve in some areas. By treating violence as a disease, the authorities aim to diagnose the problem and treat the causes of that disease. They took a public health approach. Officers worked with teachers, social workers, health workers, and gang members to collect and share an understanding of those involved in the gangs. Could the same approach work in London, the country's capital and the capital of British knife crime? In London and also across England and Wales, the number of children and young people linked to knife crime and murders and manslaughters using knives has risen massively. The Home Office said it set out a range of actions to tackle violent crime in October. Croydon Central MP Sarah Jones, who chairs the all-party parliamentary group on knife crime, believes Glasgow has exactly the right approach and public services should work together to prevent youths carrying a weapon in the first place. She wants investment in policing and other public services and promotes the treatment of knife crime as a public health issue.
Is there a link between hard times and serious crime? And why are younger people most affected by this rise in knife crime? Simple questions with important answers. And let's start with this. Why is knife crime on the rise in the UK? We put that to the public here in South London. This is what they said.
Well, I think knives coming up because there's less things for people to do. People ain't got nothing to do, they're bored, and the things that they do receive is like unfiltered information from the internet. You know, before, the TV used to be kind of, you know, you watched what you put on TV. Now it's online. So everyone's getting kind of manipulated and, what's that thing called, desensitized to violence.
Because the government is doing absolutely nothing to rectify it.
It's a lot of crime within noise and knives.
Austerity, lack of investment in children's services, schools, and everything to do with that.
Down to miseducation, possibly. It's down to people not having enough, community, enough, understanding of what the meaning of life is, and just people just not thinking about what they're doing with their life, and not understanding what the effects of what they do has on everybody else that's around them.
I think it's always been there. I think it's just more widely reported because of social media, to be honest with you.
I think a combination of reasons, but mainly because spending on community services has plummeted in the so-called austerity era we live in. Police numbers have fallen. For people to deny there's a link between falling police numbers and the rise in knife crime is like denying that an increase in sunshine causes an increase in sunburn. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Young people, they don't have family cover or family protected. They do something bad in the night, so that's not protected on this place area. So we have to be careful in the night on this area.
That's probably going too far a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily say austerity cuts, but I mean, I hear a lot about youth centers. I've heard a lot about lack of resources in schools, things like that. I understand that. And obviously, you're implying police as well. But, I mean, it's more than that. It's more than that. If people get stuff done from the home to start out with, obviously austerity affects that as well, because if you don't have money to help your child, then they'll hang about doing nothing.
People tempting young kids who have no purpose, no place to go into gangs. And so gangs, I think, are the key to all of this problem, or most of this problem.
I think knife crime's on the rise because government, police, social institutions have taken their gaze of the seriousness of knife crime. If we go back 12, 13 years, the level of knife crime, the level of young people killed as a use of knife crime was as high as it was last year. And there was a tremendous amount of work done by police, government, retailers, schools to actually get some control over it. And over time, it reduced. And I guess, like anything else, when the priority reduces, then you move your gaze to something else. And unfortunately, what we've now seen is an incredible increase in the level of use of knife crime and the death of people, predominantly young people, from the use of knife crime.
Is that 98% of all black youth in the United Kingdom did not, I repeat, get in trouble with the criminal justice or have any contact with the criminal justice system last year. So we've got 0.04% of people who are affected, 98% of people who have no real contact with the criminal justice system. And yet, when you look at the newspapers, when you look at the media reporting, we're being described as having a knife crime epidemic. Well, if you want to call it an epidemic, I think the World Health Organization describes any infection rate that is above 7.7% as an epidemic. 0.4% within the black community, it's not an epidemic. And even if we were to count all the knife crimes nationally, it still wouldn't come up to epidemic levels.
What does the public think about any connection between crime and austerity?
Especially in England, there's more options than people think, they just don't realise. But at the same time, you have to be smart enough to understand that. And these kids ain't smart enough to understand that because they live in a cocoon.
I've got three PhD holders and 2 masters. So it's possible. At the same time, I worked hard because I'm a determined woman. I'm an enthusiastic person. But of course, we know that some are weaker, some are weaker. Do you understand? So what could help eradicate this, I think, is one thing. Create an incentive. Instead of wasting buildings like this all over the place, have an open building for creativity. Give the children incentive and tax their mother. If you don't move your child to go to this place, you're not getting what you derive.
Yes, exactly. Because it's a lot of jobless and expensive, everything is expensive. You can't afford now here.
Less funding for young people and young people's services in general. Less money for the police to deal appropriately with the crimes and poverty generally.
I don't think it is. I think it is more of a case of people, basically territories and gangs, and the mentality isn't correct, and people aren't thinking, as I say, of what the implications of what their actions actually become.
Always, yeah. The have-nots and people do it. Going back how many years, people steal things if they don't have them. Sadly, this is what happens.
I don't think so necessarily. I think when you withdraw vital community services from vulnerable areas, then I think people lose all sense of identity, all sense of kind of hope, and they stop believing there's a chance to improve their lot in life. And I think that's when crime and becomes more of an issue.
Everything is implying lack of resources. Everything is implying kids hanging about, not going to school, obviously. But if it's deeper than that, I don't want to get too deep.
I think it has a fair amount to do with it. You can't get away from that, but there are some underlying social problems as well that we need to address that are actually the root cause of the problem.
Yes, there is a connection between austerity and crime. And if you look at some of the social studies, there are some social scientists who say that when there's austerity, crime goes up because people who commit offences haven't got disposable income to be able to buy what they want, so they steal it. So acquisitive crime goes up. And I guess what we're talking about here in the sense of austerity and crimes of violence, and austerity and, knife-enabled crime, what we're seeing at the moment. Yes, it does, because austerity leads to cuts in numbers, police, social service, local authority, cuts in resources for which you can actually set up things like youth clubs and keep them going, cuts in facilities that take young people away from the street. So all those things combined lead to a reduction in the formal social control of young people's behaviour, also leads to a reduction in informal social control of young people, which puts them in an opportunity where they can be victims of crime or offenders.
If you follow on and read the Spirit Level by the Equality Trust, then you will also see that increased poverty relates to crime. And in our communities, we've just suffered 8 years of austerity. It is the magnifying glass that has amplified poverty and disadvantage in our communities. Before 2008, we were already the highest unemployed group, the highest group with poverty, at least one of the highest groups, along with Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities in terms of poverty in the UK. Now, after 8 years of austerity, we've seen those rates massively amplify. So we know austerity has increased disadvantage, discrimination, racism, as well as increasing violence as a consequence of cuts to frontline services in the poorest areas of the country.
Why is crime affecting teenagers more than any other group? We asked the public here in London.
Because at the end of the day, older people have come to an understanding about life. They ain't got no understanding about life, and no one's teaching them about life because everyone's scared to deal with them.
Because they are not happy from home. The stress is too much. Women are stressing so much. They don't know what their children are doing, and they don't know where their children are at any given moment or whom their friends are. We need to educate women to love their children more.
I think young people are more risk-taking. I think older people have got more responsibilities. Young people are more likely to be prone to risks and spend more time in large groups and with their peers and that sort of thing. Whereas adults live at less, so they've got to work and that sort of thing.
It's not being educated enough to understand the values of what they're doing and the life that they have and the direction that maybe their life is going in, and it's a frustration that maybe they're not seeing the opportunities that they have, but they could be doing a lot more with their lives, so we could be contributing to their city, to their community a lot more and a lot better than they currently are.
Youth culture, gang culture, and about protection. There's a lot of knives on the street, sadly. It's always been that way. People carry knives for fear of attack, I think.
I don't strictly know the answer. I mean, I suspect it's to do with lack of resources and education in areas where knife crime tends to proliferate. I think it's to do with a sense of displacement, a lack of hope for anything better in the future.
We are parents. We have to be careful our young people. I know we have to work a lot for our expense, our family, but we have to be careful. We have to protect, to educate our young people. That's the reason I think the main point to this happen.
I have no idea. I mean, I cannot understand why knives are so important to this group of kids, why it's something that people feel necessary to carry. I mean, I guess it's better than guns, but it's still a terrible thing. But why knives? No idea.
I think the government is failing young people who are victims of knife crime and also offenders who are victims of knife crime, because last year the government launched its violent crime strategy, which in my view I thought was brilliant because it contained both preventative as well as enforcement activity priorities, as well as using communities to help solve the issue. Absolutely brilliant. But since last year, the government announced £100 million funding towards implementing some of those initiatives, but there's not been any drive. The drive has not been there to actually say, who's going to pick this up, who's going to lead it, who's going to make sure we have some consistency, and actually the strategy gets implemented and turns into practice. So in that sense, government starts off with a fantastic strategy, but is let down by actually not following it through and driving this implementation so we can then try and see the outcomes, the positive outcomes. In that sense, the government are letting down young people.
And finally, you just can't isolate off the rationality of the Western mind in policy terms wants to put everything in little boxes. Let's have youth violence. Let's tackle youth violence. Well, that youth has been brought up most likely in a household where his mother was the victim of domestic violence. Domestic violence murders far exceed teenage knife crime murders in terms of their numbers. If you're a victim of violence as a young person, you're more likely to be a violent perpetrator. So in doing deep analysis of the social reality of violence from studies all over the world, experts have concluded that it is a socially contagious disease, much like racism, and that if you live in a household where violence pertains, you can also contract the virus.
Let's look at the facts. Police say offenders aged under 18 rose from 26 to 46 between 2016 and 2018. The number of children in England aged 16 and under being stabbed rose by 93% in the 5 years to 2018. And children aged 16 and under treated for stab wounds in England rose from 180 in 2012 to 13 to 347 in 2017 to 18.
In the public's view, where should resources be spent to tackle this crime epidemic?
Definitely in the community with the right people, because I've seen a lot of people, the wrong people, getting the money, and they just filter off into their little things, and you know what I mean. But the real people on the ground, you need to find out who the people who are working, not the people who just got names, and you know what I mean. But the people actually on the ground, like myself and my friend over there, Mac. He does nice down bikes up, and he gets like 10 to 5,000 kids having drives through London. The police block off the roads, and it's all because they've realised that he cares about them, so they follow him.
When a hungry lion is an angry lion anywhere, and that's why children do this. But with a little bit of incentive, pocket money, to say, look, every week we want you in this center to do this or this. Otherwise, arrest you on the street. Stop and search is not the answer. I don't know where they got that from, that is going to be an answer. It's never going to be an answer.
Government must spend money for the education, and education is free.
Education in schools, yeah, I think education is the main thing.
It seems that maybe if their influence was more prominent, that maybe there would be some kind of change, but it seems to be a lot more standoffish. It doesn't seem to be a one person or a one kind of person that is stepping forward to say, okay, let me take ownership of it and let me try and make it a better place for everybody.
It's a difficult thing. I mean, I saw a thing the other day about policing not being a reason for knife crime going up, but I think it probably is. I think more resources need to be made available for it.
You just got to increase spending. It's not rocket science. You've got to have more people on the ground, more involvement at the community level. You've got to make sure police numbers are maintained, and you've got to make sure that the resources are put into right at the grassroots level to prevent people and being attracted to gang culture and picking up a knife in the first place.
The basic education is from their family.
Police is the last end, but if you start early, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't need to do that.
Money should be spent on preventing kids being excluded from school. That is the primary cause, to my mind, and to improving basic parenting skills and helping young parents look after their kids and provide proper, family background for them, stable family background.
I think the money should go to a whole range of different organisations. So we definitely need enforcement, because there are some young people who are just bad, who will commit offences, and there's no form of deterrence, cajoling is going to stop them. So you need enforcement. That money needs to go to policing, enforcement arms to make sure that the police target their resources to deal with those. But you also need money to go into education. So teachers can have more time to teach. Schools can have the incentive not to exclude young people, which takes them away from that control, where in that environment where there can be control. Money needs to go to communities. There's a whole range of different foundations where families, predominantly mothers, have lost children. They set up a foundation. Many of them doing fantastic work. It'd be great for the government to put money in actually how do we pull all those foundations together, get them working consistently to contribute to finding a solution that's more longer lasting.
As Director of Policing for London, when Ken Livingstone was in power, I had more money, more police officers, 100% increase on the stop and search that you currently see now, and we had more murders in the capital than we do now. So if policing is the answer, you're asking the wrong question. So the Home Secretary Sajid Javid this week, announced 100 million for police overtime. I don't know how much police overtime that will pay for, but I don't suspect it's going to be anywhere near as effective as he thinks it is. You can't rely on checks from downtown, the Home Office, the government or anyone else to save your kids. Yeah, we want our money back that we pay as taxpayers. I think that's absolutely right. But to be solely dependent on that as a means of saving your children is a piece of moral hypocrisy. Surely the first priority of any generation is to invest in the future of its own children. And regardless of what the government is or isn't doing, we should be funding our own responses.
And then we come to this key question. In the public's view, is the government doing enough about this crime crisis?
I don't actually know what the government's doing, because I hear things on the news, but we're on the ground, innit? And we're doing as much as we can, so I think they probably could do more, but there's always things that have to be balanced out. Books have to be balanced out, and someone loses somewhere, you know what I mean?
They're not doing anything. They should talk to me, pay me to stop the crime problem, resolve the issue.
They're sitting in the parliament, but we are talking, they do nothing. They don't listen.
It could think a lot more innovatively about how to tackle the problem and not just relying on old techniques that are a response to problems from a bygone era. The world is so different now, and yet the things young people are dealing with now are completely new.
I think we always look to our government to do more, because that's what they're there for. I think if there is a change, there's someone from the government to say, okay, I'm going to step up, we need to get together and think of what we need to do to get knife crime completely wiped away, pretty much.
I don't think it's a question of commitment. I just don't think they're throwing enough money at it. I don't think they're throwing enough people at it. I don't think anything has changed. It's as I say, I just think it's more widely reported now because of social media and access to the internet. We didn't have that 30 years ago, but I don't think anything has really changed. I think it's just we know more than we used to.
Not at all. It seems to me now that the prospect of increased resources that are now being talked about is only a result of trying to bribe, constituents in areas where knife crime is present to kind of vote for this appalling Brexit deal we've got on the table.
Obviously not. Come on, man. You started out by asking me about austerity. That's the problem, austerity. I mean, the library is under-resourced. All of the community centres are gone. I mean, it's not police. You don't want police to be holding people in cells. What you need is to give young people stuff to do.
I don't think any government can do enough. But yeah, I think they've started again, stop and search, which I think is important. What else can they? Of course, they could spend more money on policing. Of course, they could spend more money on housing and on schooling. But is the money there? Very doubtful. So,
I think the government's reaction is spasmodic and sporadic. And the government, the Home Secretary last year expressed concern at a Conservative government conference about the level of knife violence, which said a great deal, but then things went quiet. 2 weekends ago, we had 2 young people killed, one in East London, one in Manchester. And then the language just changed completely, became a national emergency, became a priority. We had to stop this scourge on society. I feel like saying, it's been going on for 18 months. Why is it there's a knee-jerk reaction for 2 murders, far too many for one weekend? That level of concern and commitment should have been there 18 months ago. So in that sense, I don't think the government's doing enough. I think it's too knee-jerk, it's too reactionary. The government should plan, have a level of commitment and follow that through, regardless of the ethnicity, regardless of the age of the young person, regardless of the location in which they're killed. If the government does that, we can find a solution that's more longer lasting across the country.
If you're going to tackle violence, then you have to deal with the whole totality of violence in a community. We can't do what these statutory organisations, the Mayor, the Commissioner, the Home Secretary Sajid Javid and everybody else wants us to do, which is say, let's deal with youth crime. Little bit of youth crime. Let's focus on youth crime, teenage murders, youth crime. And the reality is that's just one segment. More women die of domestic violence every year in this country than die of knife crime violence. And those kids are likely to come from homes where domestic violence is a feature. So if you're not dealing with domestic violence, you won't be dealing with knife violence. And if you're dealing with knife violence, but you're not dealing with the sexual rape and abuse of young girls, you're not dealing with the whole totality of violence. You can't segue off violence into some discrete silo and say, we'll deal domestic over here, youth over there, and abuse of women and children over there. It doesn't work. One has to deal with the totality of the violence in a particular community.
Crime in the UK is on the rise, with figures reaching levels not seen in over a decade. The fact that children in England aged 16 and under being stabbed rose by 93% in the 5 years since 2013 is just one example of the violence which affects the public every single day across the UK. Despite the expenditure by authorities, only Scotland seems to have found some kind of a way forward with this criminal activity.
Worries about violent crime affect the public. Knife crime at epidemic levels, and a virtual doubling of those under 16 who have been stabbed. In Scotland, they seem to have found a partial solution to this violent malaise. But it seems in England and here in London, there is as yet no cure to this social disease.